in that, I'd like to hear your explanation of what just happened. What was this that you did? What is this piece for us in your words? If someone just said, hey, what is this? How would you describe it? What you just did?
Sure. So it was a real brief introduction to post-communist societies and some things that perhaps aspire to be, which is a democracy, and then some issues that arise with a big thing, elections, right? I think that's always a hot topic, no matter what type, whether you have a democracy or not. Elections are always a hot topic. So I did spend a chunk of the piece kind of discussing some issues and like some aspirations people have when it comes to elections, such as, trying to be free, to pursue certain things, but not being really able to because you have issues. And then also concluding kind of with the role that like civilians or the population has, kind of how they can impact change. So I do have the poem divided into 4 parts, right? Like the definition, then going into how to be a democracy, then talking about elections, and then concluding with like civil realizations. So again, this very, very brief introduction almost about some things that go on in this region.
Is there anything better than a trip getting ready?
Nope.
For a long journey where our podcast released a new epi, searching for a fade fiend, new fixation. Giving this a subscribe is the same sensation. Started with the day ones, they gave us fuel to support the season. Could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here for a reason. Notification bells, text your friends, all to let you know. Check your Bluetooth, connect, talking with Donato.
Welcome in, everyone. We have something pretty good in store today. We're going to delve into a little poetry with our guest, Polina. Polina, how are you today?
Excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Donato.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're excited. I thought I was more excited. To hear you say excited makes me more excited, but I'm pretty excited. For our listeners, this is the first time. This is the first poetry moment, the first poetry pod that we've done. I can't wait to get into it. So what I thought was, let's allow your art to speak, and maybe we'll get into a little of the conversational at the end, a little Q&A towards the end. How's that sound?
I'm all here for it. Let's go.
All right. Well, the floor is yours, Polina.
Democracy and dictatorship in post-communist societies. Part 1. Let's define the ride. Let's take a trip through post-communist societies. PCS for short. I'll be your tour guide here. There will be landmarks and avenues you'll want to know. Remember, your trip will always count on variables, those memorable features you should know. From this window here, you see democracy, but what you see is rather complex. Most minimalize what the system is. Perhaps it is not as simple as we want to claim it is. So this democracy we see, it's not just a lose-win situation. You mean to tell me there are inherent freedoms, rights, and expectations, and we must share the power? So why do people act like we don't have to do all that? We love to simplify terms, throw around dictatorships, like we can just bottle all the non-democracies into one category. Democracy, autocracy, dictatorship. Those are all the terms of the past trip. On this ride, let me introduce you to some hybrid regimes where things aren't quite as simple as they seem. Step into the world of competitive authoritarian regimes and see unfair and unfree elections. There's not much opposition, and what there is subject to harassment. We'll need a car for that special trip. But wait, we need a map of our path. As one of you may ask, what is the post-communist region? Just 15 former Soviet Union states, plus under Soviet influence, 12 Eastern European states. And don't forget Mongolia. Cars here lack democratization and compared with stable, rising authoritarian regimes in that nation. So how do we be a democracy? Do we wake up one day and decide to move away from what we have always known? No. We probably ran into some money problems, like the union in the 80s. We were in a relationship with commitment problems, for whom we had to lower our standards, possibly of living. And then we didn't just have a lot of options of things to buy. Wait, are we talking about my college life? Oh no, this is real life. But like college, I want to fit in. I want to be like everyone else, even though I don't feel the same way as everyone else. I'm afraid to commit to my truth. This is what you call preference falsification, and many do it, democracy or not. Bleeding colors is the key for some breakthrough to democracy. Serbia led the way. First, free, fair, post-Soviet, parliamentary in 2000's election. Roses smell like Georgia in 2003. Ukraine's 2005 success. Aren't you glad for that revolution? Several things had helped. Indecisiveness meant they were semi-autocratic. The incumbent, not quite popular. Opposition, actually united and organized. Believe it or not, someone had the audacity to prove voting results and their falsity. Thanks, media. But not just any media, independent media, informing citizens about voting history. And Mongolia, I told you don't forget about Mongolia. Puzzling as it was, poor and landlocked, yet capable of strong legislature and a multi-party party system. Elections. What do we need? Voters to care. But what about the future outcomes? How can you tell me how to do that since we lack information accuracy? Plus, there's no transparency. Russia asks, do you not trust our fair elections? Leaving everyone to ask, what are you putting out into the world? Post-communism means a new beginning. That's what the era of the 1990s tried to breathe into societies. So here we go, with people trying to be free. Navalny felt free, free to perpetuate moral duty, to flaunt his responsibility as citizen and human, to make claims to be responsible for the country, but he never lived to be free. Elections lead to laws like Duverger's law. Tourists, you've seen this before, in the old US of A, where they have one winner, two main parties, thanks strategic voting. There they have accountability, legitimacy of government. They're enforcing some sort of social contract. In other places, aka authoritarian elections, it's a show of strength of the regime, a showing of commitment to some electoral processes, a show of an attempt to build a nation state. All of it just a show. Who wants to risk and watch a show where the end is unknown? Isn't there comfort in knowing who will win? Now that's what I call power. Hungry for power, like Orban. Hungry for food prices, frozen in time. Freeze fuel prices. Fill up those bellies and cars. Don't forget to dominate the news. Redraw the districts. Let people choose districts to register and vote in. Incentivize them with carrots. Be sure to intimidate with sticks. Civil realizations. We visit civil society, those organizations, those associations who are not the government and not about the business of the nation. Of course, they're weaker in the PCS. Who there is used to being a part of something that isn't the government's. I don't trust you, them, or any intentions. Get out of my business. We aren't close. You promised transition would be better, but I'm not enjoying this mandatory move. The move away from everything I've always known. Leave me alone. I don't want to engage in your gatherings, your groups, or your discussions. One final stop along the tour, the Mass Mobilization Museum. The mass protest exhibit keeps the regime accountable, but not without their own disputes. Collective action problems, a fancy way of reminding us about commitment and trust issues, coordination problems, because remember, I don't have enough information to follow through and meet up with you. Mass mobilizations can lead to a variety of peaceful colors. Some would want to shout and ask, are you coloring around my country? Cease the pieces of the piece of revolutions. Let's all head back to the color red. As we come to the close of this journey, who knows what the next tour holds? Let's look to the West. Are we linking up or using leverage to try to leave the authority of this life behind and try this new thing called democracy? The thing that everyone expects us to wear, like it's a shoe and one size fits all the spaces with remnants of communism, evident in our older communist-inspired folks and populations. You cannot eradicate those views, beliefs, and opinions when the evidence is still here to perpetuate that which once was and that which can still be. So please leave us alone and let us run our own things.
Wow, I really like that. Okay, so I've got a lot here. First, how did that flow for you? Did you feel like it came out? You started at the end and you had to come back to the beginning, or did you write that all the way through? What was the flow when it was time to make that?
So it definitely was written in bits and pieces. Some things, color revolutions that happened in places like Serbia, Georgia, and Ukraine. When you think of color and the post-communist societies, the big color was always red. I knew I wanted to dive into. I see. Is that red? Is that red? I definitely wrote this in pieces and then realized that I wanted to create a journey as if we're on a tour, exploring the various regions and comparing what we see as either exhibits or landmarks. So there wasn't a start to begin with, but there definitely was a start and an end after everything was put together.
So that was, sorry, I didn't time it. It was a lengthy piece. Do you think that you could have added more? Did you have to stop yourself? Or do you think that you had to, it was shorter and you felt like you needed to make it longer? Which one did you end up with there?
I had to stop myself because there was more I could write about.
Yeah.
I didn't even get to the role of media, what people want to always call propaganda, but nowadays you just talk about the influence of social media. So we didn't even talk about that and how certain nations are using that to control and influence their populations, and also discuss what the youthful generation has, what impact it has on that. So no, I could have kept going. I mean, you did say it was lengthy. It was. I didn't time myself either, but there's a lot you can say about this.
I feel like a lot of us, mostly speaking as Americans, I've lived in a few other countries, I'm going to say internationally, I think some of us think that Mongolia is just its own entity. I would allege that it's the forgotten part of the Soviet Union. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I think it definitely is forgotten, and especially because I think it's also shocking when you realize its proximity to Russia and Central Asia, and that it actually has democratized, better perhaps than a lot of other nations, or rather unexpectedly. So people kind of, and again, you're right, it depends what your knowledge of the area is, and or knowledge or lack thereof, because again, a lot of people always think, oh, that's over there, we're the West, just like everybody thinks, oh, the West is over there, and the West thinks everything else is over there. So to some, it's just a country next to Russia, but it definitely is forgotten. There's a lot you can learn from them.
I feel like you were teaching me something as I listened, and I just wonder, do you, and I may be putting the pressure on you now, did you feel like you almost had to, I hate to say, maybe dumb it down, or you had to Polina explain some items that maybe people weren't up to, or were you uninhibited and you just let it flow and just, we got to catch up?
So in the process of creating this, I did have lengthy statements or perhaps explanations of terms that I wanted to incorporate. And then from there, I cut it, not necessarily to dumb it down, but more so to explain in simple flowing terms. So that way the piece could flow, just like, I'll give you an example, competitive authoritarian regimes, there's a lot that goes into that, but unfair and unfree elections, not having much opposition, or if you are an opponent, then you're going to be subject to harassment. So that's really a very short description of what it is, because there are people make this their life study, and there's a lot you can talk about it. So it was just very, very artistic decision at this point, because you can still educate with less is more sometimes. So you can still educate with short phrases and short sections.
I feel like you've gone down a lane that very few people would go to. Uh, with the fall of the Soviet Union, I can't say people go to any of those former states for artistic expression. Do you agree or disagree that this would be a standalone effort? You are making art out of history into an art, which is an art. You feel that way?
Yes, because you're right. It is one, it's an area that if you're not familiar with or you're not studying, you probably, or not probably, you most likely won't understand a lot of what has been stated. So I could see this piece being almost a sort of a book, a poetic book of the breakdown of Russian East European nation states, post-communism societies, right? And then that's where I could expand upon what I have there, since I just have to say I have to cut it short, and I could focus on either you could go country by country and create a creative piece, or you could go by topic. You could focus on elections. You could go further into why we're not using the term dictator or dictatorship, and why we're using now competitive authoritarian regime. Because again, most people probably are just, oh, that's dictatorship, 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 which we've used historically over the past several decades. But now we have to reassess what those post-communist societies are. So we after the 90s, we said, okay, these are the post-communist societies, but is that still an appropriate term to use today, 30 years later?
Did I gather in your performance of the piece, there are now 15 states that were carved up from the Soviet Union? Did I hear that correct? Or could you give me the definition of what the 15? Because I thought that's where I ended up. 15 states.
That's correct. So as I mentioned, I talk about post-communist societies. There's a post-communist region because not everyone who was communist or was in the Soviet Union, right? So there are 15 former Soviet Union states that make up the post-communist region, but then there's also 12 Eastern European states and Mongolia. So it's best. So in my, book, this could be, it's definitely helpful to have a visual, a map of what that is, because there's also going to be regions that maybe we don't call what they are, what they used to be called. We don't call them. And also, we boundaries and borders, names have shifted. A great one is in Russia. People know St. Petersburg, but you have people who remember it as Leningrad in their lifetime. So that's a simple thing where maps and definitions really would help for those, not even those familiar with it, because what is Eastern Europe, right? Some people, yes, there are some people that say, well, it's anything that's not Western Europe, but then you also have Central Europe.
Sure.
So visually, that would be the most helpful. But no, you heard correctly. 15 former Soviet Union states.
You mentioned something. There was another question I had, but I wanted to get to the 15. But then you ended up kind of answering the question for me. I'll just restate, if you'll allow me. What if you're an old guy who grew up during a time and you remember that a country that gave us a vehicle used to be called something? A very popular basketball player came from this same country I'm thinking of. I was wondering, have you come across to finding out if these countries are okay with it? I know you mentioned like a city that might still be called something else by some people. I was thinking Yugoslavia. They brought us a car, the Yugo. Vlade Divac came from there, basketball player, played for the Lakers, Sacramento Kings. Not to nerd out on sports here, but I believe some of us from another time still think of those countries as that. Are we being rude to those countries? Do they take offense if they are called something of a former time?
Sure. So I think you're always going to have populations that are going to be offended by the terms we use because, once terms are created and exist for a while, then it's kind of hard to shed their usage. Even things like, Russia or Soviet Union, so Russian Federation, Soviet Union. How many other names are there for something that everybody, maybe more people know of just because of its size? So there's always going to be someone who is offended. But then, as I kind of alluded to it towards the end of the poem, that how do we get rid of these competitive authoritarian regimes? Some people say that we have to get rid of the older population, and in terms of, well, they still have memories of what life was like, and sometimes they're the people who are either sitting in power, trying to influence power, and so they may also be the people going back to, back when it was Yugoslavia, back when it was the Soviet Union, right? Because when everyone was like, we got to transition from communism to now, democracy, because that seems to be the standard. But it kind of either failed in some places, or people didn't see immediate change. So people, again, those populations that recall what life was like before the 90s, they might say, well, my life was pretty decent back then. It's no better now. So I think that what we had is good. So it will probably continue to take time, but that's not just attributed to this region. There's a lot of things in the world and terms we use in the world that we probably shouldn't be using nowadays, but we're just so used to and so ingrained that it's just going to take the practice of correcting people and reminding them, actually Yugoslavia no longer exists, but people out there probably still think of it that it is, because again, it's a place, if you're in the US, it's a place that is over there, and if you're not closely associated with that country or any of these regions, then out of sight, out of mind kind of concept.
I was told there'd be no math. Polina, did you just teach us some things? Did we learn something? Some of us came here for a performance, and I after hearing that, I feel like you taught me something. So in that, I'd like to hear your explanation of what just happened. What was this that you did? What is this piece for us, in your words? If someone just said, hey, what is this? How would you describe it? What you just did?
Sure. So it was a real brief introduction to post-communist societies and some things that they perhaps aspire to be, which is a democracy, and then some issues that arise with a big thing, elections, right? I think that's always a hot topic, no matter what type, whether you have a democracy or not. Elections are always a hot topic. So I did spend a chunk of the piece kind of discussing some issues and like some aspirations people have when it comes to elections, such as, trying to be free, to pursue certain things, but not being really able to because you have issues. And then also concluding kind of with the role that like civilians or the population has, kind of how they can impact change. So I do have the poem divided into 4 parts, right? Like the definition, then going into how to be a democracy, then talking about elections, and then concluding with like civil realizations. So again, this very, very brief introduction almost about some things that go on in this region.
So thanks for that. I was just kind of curious, would there be anything else that you wanted us to gain, walk away from, reminisce of, recall when it comes to this? Aside from me badgering you with all of my questions, I just wanted to see if there was anything in particular you wanted to get out, or you wanted this to be remembered as.
Yeah, just, the biggest thing is that there's a lot of terms used in the world, and that people throw around terms without really understanding their definitions. So the next time somebody says democracy, just question it and just be, like, what does that actually mean? Because again, if you poll general population, they'll be like, oh, well, that's the United States. Okay, but you're not defining what it is. And just like we have different countries, okay, so let's define the country in terms of attributes or what their economy looks like, or let's take a look at their politics, because there are countries that would say, yeah, we're democratic because we have multiple parties. Okay, so are we saying multiple parties is what makes a democracy? Because there's places that have multiple parties but are very clearly not democracies. So it's just being open-minded, that what things look like or what you think they aren't what they seem, and then just questioning, okay, let's get on the same page. What do you mean when you use this term? That's my takeaway.
No. This was great. I'm asking for a friend. I've got a statistics professor, fraternity brother. Could you do a piece for him to get people interested in statistics? You did great there.
Listen, I pursued liberal arts. I attempted the mathematical, the STEM piece at one point, and realized that was not my strength.
Yeah.
Could I? I guess I could. Would the audience understand anything? I guess that's going to be up to interpretation.
Yeah. This was great. Polina, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing with us. And again, 15 states. And I not only learned so much more today, you kept us focused and entertained throughout. You definitely entertained with your piece. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donato, and I'll keep you posted if this ever ends up as a book.
Yeah. You'll have to come back. We'll talk more about it.
Well, thank you again.
Hey, thanks a lot. Have a great night.
Thanks, you too.